Part 1. The insult he thought I'd never understand. I never planned to expose my son-in-law. That afternoon, I was just trying to enjoy a quiet family gathering, the kind where everyone pretends things are fine, even when they aren't. The house smelled of fresh coffee and old paint. Our family painting hung proudly in the living room, right where it had been for decades. It wasn't famous, it wasn't expensive, but it carried memories. My parents, my childhood, sacrifices no one ever bothered to ask about. That painting meant everything to me. My son-in-law Luke stood in front of it with a glass of wine in his hand. He leaned closer, smirked, and whispered something under his breath in French. He thought no one understood him. With a lazy smile, he said, "C'est hideux. Absolument embarrassant. It's hideous. Absolutely embarrassing." Then he laughed, a quiet, smug laugh. The kind people make when they think they're smarter than everyone else in the room. My daughter smiled nervously, pretending not to hear. The rest of the family kept talking, unaware of the insult that had just been thrown at our history. But I heard every single word. You see, Luke never asked about my past. He never cared where I studied, never wondered why I read certain books, or why my accent disappeared when I was tired. He assumed I was simple, convenient, invisible. He assumed wrong. Inside, something shifted. Not anger, not yet, but clarity. This wasn't just about a painting. It was about respect. It was about years of quiet judgment. And it was about a man who thought language gave him power. I didn't react. I didn't correct him. I didn't raise my voice. I smiled. Because the moment someone underestimates you, that's the moment you gain control. And what Luke didn't know, what he could never imagine, was that this painting, the one he mocked so easily, was tied to a truth that would unravel everything he thought he knew about my family, and about himself. If you enjoy slow-burn revenge stories, hidden intelligence, and moments where arrogance collapses under its own weight, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss what happens next. Because in part 2, Luke doesn't just insult the painting again. He reveals why he truly despises it. And that's when the game truly begins. Part 2. The painting they never asked about. Luke didn't stop after that first comment. That was the part that stayed with me later. Not the insult itself, but how comfortable he was insulting something that wasn't his. He circled the painting like a critic in a gallery, swirling his wine, pointing at details as if he were doing us a favor by acknowledging it at all. Still in French, still casual, he said, "The proportions are amateur. The colors are outdated. Honestly, it looks like something hung in a cheap provincial cafe." He chuckled again. This time I noticed something else. He wasn't just mocking the art. He was mocking us. My family had always been quiet people. Not flashy, not loud. We valued work over words, effort over appearances. Luke was the opposite: designer suits, expensive watches, the constant need to feel superior. And marrying my daughter into his world had only inflated that ego further. What hurt wasn't that he disliked the painting. What hurt was that he never once asked who painted it. If he had, he would have learned that the artist was my mother. If he had cared, he would have known she painted it in the final winter of her life, when money was scarce and hope even scarcer. If he had looked closely, he might have seen the brush strokes trembling, not from lack of skill, but from illness. But Luke didn't see history. He saw weakness. That night, after everyone left, I stood alone in the living room and studied the painting again. The soft blues, the imperfect lines, the small signature in the corner that only family ever noticed. I remembered sitting beside my mother as a child, translating letters for her, from French. Letters from galleries, from professors, from institutions that had recognized her talent long before life got in the way. Yes, French. The same language Luke used to belittle her work. I learned it not from books, but from survival, from translating contracts, from helping my parents navigate a world that never made things easy for them. It wasn't a party trick. It was a tool, one I kept sharp and quiet. And Luke? Luke mistook silence for ignorance. The next morning my daughter called me. She sounded tired. Dad, she said gently, Luke didn't mean anything by it. He's just honest. Honest. That word stung more than any insult. I asked her a simple question. Has he ever asked you about that painting? There was a pause. No, she admitted. Why would he? Why indeed? Because asking would require humility, and Luke had none. What my daughter didn't know, and what I didn't tell her yet, was that the painting wasn't just sentimental. It was documented, archived, part of a collection that had resurfaced recently after decades of obscurity. And the irony? Luke's company had just invested millions into a European cultural project tied directly to that same artistic movement, a movement my mother helped shape. That night I opened an old folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside were certificates, letters, exhibition programs, all in French, all proof, all inconvenient. I didn't smile. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm. Because revenge doesn't begin with anger. It begins with preparation. And in part 3, Luke takes his arrogance one step too far by inviting the wrong people to judge that painting publicly. People who know exactly what they're looking at. And this time, I won't stay silent. Part 3, the invitation that changed everything. Luke didn't just want approval. He wanted an audience. A week after that dinner, an embossed envelope arrived at my house. Thick paper, gold lettering, the kind of invitation meant to impress before it was even opened. It was for a private reception. Luke's company was hosting a cultural investment showcase. Art collectors, curators, donors, and a few journalists. According to the invitation, it was meant to celebrate heritage, refinement, and legacy. I almost laughed, because Luke had none of those things. At the bottom of the card, in smaller print, it mentioned a featured private collection, select pieces chosen to represent forgotten European artists rediscovered through modern patronage. And there it was, the painting. My mother's painting. Luke had decided, without asking, that it would be displayed. Not because he respected it, but because he wanted to prove a point. At dinner the night before the event, he leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine again, speaking in French like it was a private joke. I thought it would be fun, he said, smiling, to show everyone what sentimental art looks like compared to real masterpieces. He looked straight at me. Don't worry, he added. I'll make sure they're gentle. Gentle, that word again. This time I answered him, still in English. Thank you for including it, I said calmly. I'm sure it will be educational. Luke smirked. He thought he'd won. What he didn't realize was that by putting that painting on display, he had done something irreversible. He had taken something private and placed it in front of people who knew its history better than he ever could. The night of the reception, the gallery was immaculate. White walls, soft lighting, wine flowing. Luke moved through the room like a king inspecting his court. When guests stopped in front of the painting, Luke stepped in eagerly. He explained it in French, confidently and incorrectly. He talked about primitive technique, about regional mediocrity, about how emotion can't replace mastery. People nodded politely, but not all of them. I noticed a woman near the back, silver hair, sharp eyes, posture like someone who had spent her life being listened to. She leaned closer to the painting, ignoring Luke completely. Then there was a man beside her, tall, European accent, quiet. They whispered to each other. Luke didn't notice. He was too busy performing. Finally, the woman turned to him and asked, in French, "May I ask where this piece came from?" Luke straightened. He loved questions. He launched into a vague answer about family inheritance and personal value, sprinkling buzzwords like seasoning. She waited until he finished. Then she asked something else. And the artist? Luke shrugged. An amateur, he said lightly. A relative. Nothing of note. Silence. The woman frowned, not at the painting but at him. That's strange, she said, because I recognize this signature. Luke laughed. You do? She nodded. Yes, from the Lion Winter Collective, late 1970s. Small group, very influential. Luke's smile tightened. The man beside her stepped forward. I studied under one of the founders, he said. This artist was known for hiding personal grief in composition. That trembling line? It's intentional. Luke looked around, suddenly aware that people were listening. I think there's been a mistake, he said. That's when I spoke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly. There hasn't, I said. And if you'd like, I can translate. Luke turned slowly. For the first time that evening, he looked uncertain. I switched to French. Fluently, effortlessly. I introduced myself, not as his wife's father, not as a guest, but as the executor of the artist's archived works. I watched his face drain of color as I recited dates, exhibitions, letters, details only someone deeply familiar would know. Then I said the words that shattered his confidence. You didn't just insult the painting. You insulted the movement your company just invested in. The room went quiet. Luke opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Because in that moment, he realized something terrifying. He hadn't been showcasing his power. He had been exposing his ignorance. And in part 4, Luke tries to undo the damage, privately, desperately, before the truth reaches the people who control his fortune. But it's already too late. Part 4, when confidence turns into panic. Luke didn't sleep that night. I knew it before Sophie told me. I could see it the next morning when his messages started coming. First polite, then rushed, then desperate. At 6:12 a.m., my phone buzzed. We should talk, privately. At 6:27 a.m., there's been a misunderstanding. I want to clear things up. By 7:03 a.m., the tone had changed. Please call me. Luke had finally realized what he'd done. The reception hadn't ended with applause for him. It had ended with whispers. Quiet conversations between collectors, curators, and donors who actually understood art. By morning, those whispers had turned into emails. Luke's assistant called Sophie at work. His investors were concerned. A partner had postponed a funding round. 2 galleries requested written clarification about Luke's curatorial authority. And worst of all, someone had reached out to the Lion Winter Collective archive. The same archive that still held my mother's correspondence. Luke showed up at my house that afternoon. No tailored suit this time, no confident stride. Just a man gripping his car keys too tightly. I didn't know, he said the moment I opened the door. I swear, I never knew. I invited him in, not because I wanted to comfort him, but because I wanted him to sit in the same living room, where that painting had hung, quietly for decades, unnoticed, unpraised, yet enduring. You didn't ask, I said calmly. That's different from not knowing. Luke rubbed his face. They think I disrespected the movement, he said. They think I exploited it. You did, I replied. He looked up sharply. I can fix this, he said quickly. I can issue a statement, credit the artist properly, make a donation, whatever it takes. I nodded slowly. There are ways forward, I said. But they won't look like what you're used to. Luke leaned in. I'll do anything. That was the moment I understood something important. Luke didn't care about the painting. He didn't care about my mother. He didn't even care about truth. He cared about losing face, and that made him predictable. I reached for a folder on the table and slid it toward him. Inside were copies of letters, handwritten, dated, signed. Exhibition invitations, critiques, even a rejection note that later became famous in art circles. Luke flipped through them, his breathing quickening. This proves It proves ownership, I said, and authorship, and context. He swallowed. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. I met his eyes. You told me I wouldn't understand, I said. So I listened. Silence filled the room. Then he said something that revealed everything. What do you want? He asked. Not what's right. Not how do I make this right. Just, what do you want? I stood and walked to the painting. This, I said, gesturing to it, was never meant to be leverage. He nodded eagerly. Of course. But you turned it into one, I continued, the moment you mocked it. Luke's jaw tightened. I need your silence, he said. For now, let me stabilize things. I smiled faintly. Silence, I repeated, is expensive. He stiffened. How expensive? I turned back to him. You will publicly credit the artist, fully, I said. You will fund a retrospective exhibit, not under your company's name. And you will step away from curatorial decisions until an independent review is complete. Luke stared at me. That would make me look weak. No, I corrected gently. It would make you look accountable. He hesitated, then nodded. But here's what Luke didn't know. The damage was already spreading. The woman with silver hair from the reception? She wasn't just a collector. She sat on the board of an international arts endowment. And the man beside her? He had already sent an email titled, You need to know who you insulted. By the time Luke left my house, the narrative was shifting. Not quietly, publicly. And in part 5, Luke discovers that control doesn't belong to the loudest person in the room, but to the one who waited patiently for the right moment to speak. Because reputation, once cracked, doesn't shatter all at once. It fractures, slowly, painfully, and in full view of everyone watching. Part 5. The silence that spoke louder. Luke kept his promises, at least on the surface. Within 48 hours, a carefully worded public statement appeared on his company's website. It praised overlooked contributors, acknowledged a failure in curatorial sensitivity, and announced funding for an upcoming retrospective artist to be credited in full. On paper, it looked responsible. To people who knew the truth, it looked forced, and forced apologies never age well. The art world is polite, but it's not forgiving. Within days, invitations Luke used to receive automatically stopped coming. Meetings were postponed. Until further notice. A European partner quietly pulled out of a joint venture, citing brand alignment concerns. Luke noticed. He called Sophie late one evening. They're treating me like a liability, he said, voice tight. Like I don't belong anymore. Sophie listened, silent. Then she asked a question that cut deeper than any accusation. Did you ever belong? She asked. Luke didn't answer. I watched all of this from a distance. Not smug, not celebratory, just observant. Because what Luke was experiencing wasn't punishment. It was exposure. He had built his authority on taste he didn't understand. Language he used to exclude, and confidence borrowed from other people's silence. Once that silence broke, his power evaporated. One afternoon, the silver-haired woman from the reception visited me. She introduced herself properly this time. Marguerite Delon, she said. I knew your mother. I invited her in. We sat beneath the painting Luke had mocked so casually. She was remarkable, Marguerite said softly. She refused to simplify her work for approval. That cost her. I nodded. It cost us too. Marguerite turned to me. You could have sold this quietly years ago, she said. You chose not to. It wasn't mine to sell, I replied. She smiled. That's why it matters now. She slid a document across the table. An official request. The Lion Winter Collective wanted to feature my mother's work. Not as a rediscovered novelty, but as a foundational voice. Luke's name was nowhere on the page. Meanwhile, Luke spiraled. He began correcting people publicly, interrupting conversations, over-explaining, trying to regain control. That only made it worse. People who lose power don't realize that trying to reclaim it loudly only confirms its absence. At another private event, Luke overheard a donor whisper in French. He talks like someone who memorized sophistication. Luke snapped, and that was the moment. The moment everyone saw what had been hiding behind the accent. The tailored suits, the curated persona. Insecurity. Sophie came to see me that night. Not as my daughter. As a woman finally questioning the man she married. He never asked who painted it, she said quietly. Did he? I shook my head. She exhaled slowly. He never asks, she admitted. He performs. I reached across the table and took her hand. Performance collapses, I said. Character doesn't. She nodded, tears welling. Luke didn't realize it yet, but the damage wasn't just professional. It was personal, because Sophie was no longer defending him. And in part 6, Luke makes a final attempt to save himself, not through art, not through money, but by rewriting the story inside his own family. And that is the one place his arrogance won't protect him anymore. Part 6, the story he tried to rewrite. Luke stopped calling me. That alone told me everything. People like Luke don't go silent because they've accepted defeat. They go silent because they're changing tactics. This time, he didn't want to win the room. He wanted to win Sophie. It started subtly. He became gentle, attentive. He cooked dinner, asked questions, apologized without defending himself. He even praised the painting, carefully, cautiously, as if admiration could be learned overnight. Sophie noticed. I don't recognize him, she said one evening when she came over alone. He's trying. I nodded. Trying to fix things? She hesitated, or trying not to lose them. That distinction mattered more than she realized. Luke's new story was simple. He told Sophie he'd been intimidated by my intelligence, that my silence made him insecure, that his mockery had been self-protection. He reframed arrogance as fear, cruelty as vulnerability. It was a clever narrative, and for a moment, it worked. I feel like I should forgive him, Sophie said quietly. He says he was threatened by you. I looked at her gently. Did he ever apologize to the person he insulted? I asked. She frowned. You mean Grandma? Yes, I said. Did he ever say her name? Sophie went still. No, she admitted. The truth about manipulators is simple. They apologize for consequences, not for harm. Luke didn't regret disrespecting the painting. He regretted being seen doing it. A week later, Luke made his biggest mistake. He invited Sophie and only Sophie to a meeting. Not at home, not with lawyers. At a cafe. Public, neutral, controlled. He wanted witnesses. He told her he planned to issue a final statement distancing himself from the controversy. He would resign from the board, temporarily, rebrand, start fresh. But there's one thing, he said softly. He leaned in. I need you to support me publicly. Just one post, one line saying you believe in me. Sophie stared at him. And my father? She asked. Luke smiled thinly. He'll understand. He always stays quiet. That's when Sophie finally saw it. Not clearly, not all at once, but enough. She came to see me that night, hands shaking. He wants me to erase what happened, she said. To make it disappear. I poured her tea. Then he hasn't learned anything, I replied. She looked up. What do I do? I didn't answer right away. Because this wasn't my choice to make. Finally, I said, tell the truth. Not online, not publicly, to yourself. She nodded slowly. The next morning, Sophie posted something. Not what Luke expected. No defense. No loyalty pledge. Just a photograph. The painting. With a caption, "Some things aren't decorative. They're inherited." No names. No accusations. The art world noticed. So did Luke. He arrived at my door that evening unannounced. Furious. "You turned her against me," he snapped. I met his gaze calmly. "No," I said. "You revealed yourself." He scoffed. "You think you've won?" I shook my head. "This was never a competition," I replied. "It was a lesson." His voice dropped. "You've humiliated me." "No," I said quietly. "You humiliated yourself. I just refused to hide it." Silence filled the room. Luke looked around, at the painting, the books, the quiet dignity he'd mistaken for weakness. And for the first time, he understood something he couldn't undo. He hadn't married into a family beneath him. He'd married into one that didn't need him. In part 7, the consequences turned permanent. As Sophie makes a decision that Luke can't negotiate, charm, or escape, and that decision will finally answer one question. What happens when respect disappears? Inside a marriage. Part 7, the day she chose herself. Sophie didn't come home that night. Not to me. Not to Luke. She checked into a small hotel near the river. The kind of place people choose when they need quiet, not comfort. She told me later that she sat on the edge of the bed for hours, staring at her phone, rereading the messages Luke had sent over the years. The patterns were suddenly obvious. Praise when she complied, distance when she questioned, affection tied to performance. Luke hadn't married a partner. He'd married an audience. The next morning, Sophie asked me to meet her. She looked exhausted, but clearer than I'd seen her in years. "I think I've been shrinking," she said quietly. Without noticing, I listened. "He didn't just mock the painting," she continued. "He mocked what made me, my family, my history, and I defended him. I didn't interrupt, because this wasn't about him anymore." "It scares me," she admitted. How easily I excused it. I reached across the table. "Self-awareness doesn't arrive gently," I said. "But it arrives honestly." She nodded. Then she said the words Luke never expected to hear. "I'm done trying to explain my worth." Luke called her before noon. She didn't answer. He texted. She didn't reply. By evening, he showed up at the hotel. That was his final mistake. He stood in the lobby, voice raised just enough to draw attention. "You're embarrassing me," he hissed. "People are asking questions." Sophie looked at him calmly. "For once," she said, "that's not my responsibility." Luke froze. "This isn't you," he said. "You're being influenced." She smiled sadly. "No," she replied. "This is me without fear." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "If you walk away now," he warned, "you'll lose everything." Sophie met his eyes. "I already lost myself," she said. "I'm not losing more." She turned and walked back to her room, leaving him standing there, watched, judged, alone. The separation was quiet. No screaming, no public drama, just paperwork, lawyers, silence. Luke tried to frame it as mutual. No one believed him. When he reached out to me once, I didn't refuse him. I simply said one thing. "You taught my daughter something valuable." He scoffed. "What?" How to recognize contempt. He never replied. The art world moved on quickly. That's the thing about prestige. It doesn't wait for redemption arcs. Luke's name faded from invitations. His project stalled. His reputation calcified into a cautionary tale whispered at openings and dinners. Not ruined, just irrelevant. One afternoon, Sophie helped me pack the painting. It was heading to Lyon for the retrospective. She touched the frame gently. She would have liked this, Sophie said. Yes, I replied. But she wouldn't have needed it. Sophie smiled. I think I finally understand her, she said. Luke sent one final message weeks later. No apology, just bitterness. You never gave me a chance. I didn't respond. Because the truth was simple. He had every chance. He just didn't respect the people offering them. That night, Sophie slept peacefully for the first time in years. No tension, no performance, no translation required. She didn't need to explain herself in any language anymore. And in part 8, final, the story comes to rest. With legacy, dignity, and a quiet truth that outlives arrogance. Some people lose everything not because they're exposed, but because they never learned how to listen. Part 8, what endures when arrogance fades. The house felt lighter after Luke left Sophie's life. Not emptier, not sadder, just honest. No more tension hiding behind politeness. No more translating silence into excuses. Sophie moved back home for a while. She didn't announce it. She didn't justify it. She simply came with a suitcase and a calm I hadn't seen in her since she was a child. I forgot how quiet can feel safe, she said one evening. I smiled. That's because quiet was never the problem. The painting left the house a month later. Carefully wrapped. Documented. Insured. It wasn't going to a vault. It was going to be seen, properly. The Lion retrospective opened without spectacle. No speeches from sponsors. No branding. Just the work. Contextualized with letters, sketches, and the truth of a woman who painted while life demanded silence. Reviews were respectful. Not loud. The best kind. One line stayed with me. This work doesn't ask for admiration. It demands recognition. That was enough. Luke's name never appeared in those reviews. Not once. And that absence said more than criticism ever could. He tried to rebuild elsewhere. New circles, new accents, new confidence. But arrogance without an audience is just noise. People didn't attack him. They simply stopped listening. Sophie filed for divorce quietly. No public statement. No explanation post. When people asked, she answered honestly and briefly, I chose peace. That sentence traveled further than Luke ever did. One afternoon, Sophie and I sat beneath the empty wall where the painting used to hang. Do you miss it? She asked. I thought for a moment. No, I said. It was never meant to stay. She nodded. It taught me something, she said. What's that? I asked. That respect isn't loud, she replied. And contempt always reveals itself, eventually. I smiled. You learned faster than I did, I said. She shook her head. No, I just had a better teacher. People often assume revenge needs confrontation. That dignity needs explanation. That intelligence must announce itself. They're wrong. The most powerful moments in life don't arrive with applause.